Hi, I'm Andy Thorburn, president of the Contemporary Policy Institute. I'm here today with Pastor Doug Pagitt, and we're here to talk about Christian nationalism. Before we do that, let me have Doug introduce himself so you know a little bit about Doug and his background.
Hi, Andy. I'm the executive director of Vote Common Good and have been a lifelong pastor in my adult life. I've been a pastor in the evangelical community of Christianity, and there's a small subset of progressive evangelicals. I like to say the Jimmy Carter evangelicals of the 1980s, and that's the tradition that welcomed me into Christianity. I've been pastoring for my adult life, and now I travel the country and work with religious voters and try to help them detach their religious identity from their political identity if that's something they want to do.
Well, we thank you for coming to talk about Christian nationalism today, and we're going to start with asking you to define it. Tell us, what is Christian nationalism?
Well, Christian nationalism is not Christians being public about their faith. The United States wants people to be public about their faith, no matter what their faith is, or if they don't have one, to be public about that. Christian nationalism is about the government using its authority to give preference to Christianity. Or as we like to say, Christian nationalists believe that the governments at every level, federal, state, and local, derive its authority from biblical text and Christianity, and therefore should advocate for and protect Christianity uniquely in the United States.
And when you say Christianity in this sense, do you mean all of Christianity, or are we talking about a segment of Christianity?
Yeah, this is the big conundrum for Christian nationalists, is which version of Christianity do they believe should be the official religion of the United States? And they like to speak about some broad-based Judeo-Christian background and ethic, but then you watch their demands and they're very particular. It's a certain fundamentalist expression of Christianity. But our work is not going to be satisfied if we end up with a liberal Jesus version of Christianity. We don't want any version of Christianity to be the official religion of the United States in law or in implication. And we don't believe that any government should derive its authority from the biblical text.
Right. And so I think I've heard you say this before, you found it very objectionable from your point of view when Donald Trump put the Bible in the same book as the Constitution.
Yes, when Donald Trump chose to endorse a version of the Bible that for 2 years I worked to make sure wouldn't be published. The publisher that I've published books with, called Zondervan Publishing, is the biggest publisher of Bibles in the world through Thomas Nelson Publishers. And when we found out that they were going to do a special imprint of the Bible that included the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the words to Lee Greenwood's song,
Right.
We said that is not appropriate. And Zondervan canceled that publishing contract. Then it went dormant and then was picked up in a publishing deal with Donald Trump. We thought, well, that's exactly where this thing should land, as some sort of political propaganda using the Bible as a vehicle to carry the Constitution. And I'm a big fan of both. I'm a big fan of the Bible as a Christian pastor, and I'm a big fan of the Constitution. The two don't go together, and they certainly don't go together inside the cover of something that someone wants to claim as the Holy Bible. And people can hold both of them important in their life, and frankly, people can hold neither of them important and still be American. You can say, I don't like the Constitution, I wish it was changed, I wish we had different amendments, but you're still protected by it, whether you agree with it or not. And the same goes with any religious text. You don't have to hold to it. There's no demand that you do. If you're born in the United States of America, you don't have to pledge your commitment to the Constitution. If you're an immigrant, we have a different level of demand on you, which is a curious thing for the people who don't want migrants to be a part of the American society, that they actually have a higher level of standard for what it means to be a citizen than if you were born on this soil. So we don't make demands of the Constitution on people in the United States, even though it is the basis of law and protects them. And we certainly don't make someone hold to or not hold to the Bible. But what we don't want is that people using any religious text, be it the Quran, the Torah, the New Testament, as the basis of law. It could be a personal motivation for why someone's in public work. Wonderful, whatever your motivation. But your personal experience need not be someone else's obligation. And we make that a fundamental part of the United States of America.
So clearly a lot of your work is focused on you making sure that we live up to the First Amendment.
Yes, for us, we think that the Christian community needs to care for its religion and faith in a way that it is not being misused in our society. And I could say that as a progressive evangelical, what the other evangelicals and fundamentalists are doing in America is not my problem. But I choose not to slice the prosciutto that thin to separate myself. I want to say, look, this is a community that I am a part of, and Christians need to speak to other Christians about the misuse of our sacred text and our religion in our society, and that's the work that we join with so many other groups in doing. Yes. The long history of Christian nationalism in the country has been opposed by people in government and people in religion. Because fundamentally what was going on in those early days in the Constitution was an argument around states' rights, state versus federalist arguments. And we've expanded that now to recognize that in this federal union we have, the individual really matters. And that's one of the problems with Christian nationalism fundamentally is which Christian tradition is going to be in charge? I have many Christian nationalist friends, pastor friends, and I'll say to them, if we have your way and we end up with a Christian nation, could I be the head of what it means to express Christianity as a nation? And they say no, of course. I say, well, could my friend who's a black pastor as a woman, could she be the one? Of course not.
Well, let me follow up, though, on something I think you alluded to this before. So you're a pastor. At one point, you had your own congregation.
Yeah.
But something triggered your interest in focusing on, instead of all of the many concerns of a pastor and all of the many areas that you decided to focus on Christian nationalism. So what triggered that? What made that your focus?
For a long time, I thought that Christian nationalism existed because it's always existed in our country, but it was such a low-grade fever, we didn't really need to worry about it. So a lot of pastors like me would say, look, let's not stir the nest. It was almost like lead paint that's on your house, on the outside of your house. You're better off just leaving it alone. Don't scrape it off because when it gets airborne, it's a problem. So recognize that that toxin is there, but pretty much ignore it. Then Donald Trump said to evangelicals, you elect me and I will give you power. And then Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, Michael Flynn, and other non-Mikes inside of the Trump administration, Betsy DeVos, started to say, this is a chance for us to utilize the federal and state governments to accomplish our religious goals.
Well, let's dig into this a little bit. So now that you've defined Christian nationalism, and we understand why you got triggered by it, and many other people got triggered by the Trump phenomenon for other reasons, what are the specific goals nationally of the Christian nationalist movement?
The most alive and well Christian nationalist movement in America today says their goal is not just the Christianization of the United States, but of the globe. It's a global movement. I had one of my good Christian nationalist friends say to me, the thing you need to understand about us Christian nationalists is we believe that only two nations were called into being by the very voice of God rather than by political revolution. The nation of Israel and the United States of America. So he believes that God's unique purposes for nations are to Christianize the world. And the United States is the younger big brother partnering with Israel, the older, smaller brother, to accomplish God's purposes in every nation in the world. So their goal is Christianization. In fact, the National Prayer Breakfast that many people know has existed since the 1950s has been run for the last 40 years by a Christian nationalist organizations whose purpose is to bring together leaders from around the world into a centralized power movement to Christianize every nation.
Well, let me follow up on this, though. When they say Christianize, and I want you to be very specific about this if you can, Doug, they mean Christianize on their terms.
On their
So
terms.
the question is, if they did take over the federal government, what would their terms be? How would the federal government look different than it does today?
That the federal government, and we have many videos of them saying this, and here's the great thing about Christian nationalists today, the new variant of Christian nationalism. They're not unclear,
Right.
and they're not keeping it a secret. It's very public. I would encourage people to Google something called the Watchman Decree. And it's a decree and a pledge that people take of Christian nationalism, very public and widespread. And they say that their goal is that the federal government would be inhabited by true believers of Christianity, and that the legislative branch and the executive branch and the judicial branch would pass only laws that are biblical and bring about righteousness. Now, if that was replaced with the Quran and Sharia law, these people would have a real problem. They believe that the counter to Sharia law that they are afraid is going to take over America is biblical law. They don't believe the answer is secular society. They think this is a battle between religions. For many of these Christian nationalists in America, their great threat is not secularism. Their great threat is Islam. And they have brought it up in the new variant since the attacks of September 11th, 2001,
Right.
and they're going to bring it all the way through January 6th, 2021. And this is the goal that they want to accomplish.
So on the national level, the goal is to Christianize all three branches of government. The Supreme Court may have moved a little further in that direction than we want them to.
This is why they call that an accomplishment. It's not simply because of any particular outcome. People think it's all about abortion. Abortion is the tip of the spear.
Right. So what do you think is their goal locally that fits in with that national goal? What's their operational goal here?
This new expression of Christian nationalism has reoriented its work to say we cannot simply work at the federal level. We also have to work at the local level. So they have chosen by plan to organize starting at school boards and city councils and county commissioners and state government. They're going to work from their version bottom up in government, from the smallest, closest governmental agencies to people's lives. And they feel that's the most important place to start. Now, I want to make it clear. Christian nationalism is not a grassroots movement. It is a top-down leader political movement. It's not Christianity. It uses Christianity to accomplish its political goals at the local and federal level. But their belief, and it's actually a brilliant organizing philosophy, to have a consistent movement of Christian nationalism from the most local level at your school boards. And then they realized they can't start with just the school board, they have to start with the school librarian. Because the librarian, as it turns out, has more access to curriculum development than they ever knew. A lot of these people didn't even know about library science. They didn't know that librarians were often certified in library science. So they've started to move after school libraries. These are Mothers for Liberty and other groups like this that have said, we're going to start at the most local level we can, wherever the government interfaces with our children. Now, here's what the big motivation was and the light bulb experience for them. The response of our state and federal government to the COVID virus. When they said our children have to go to school wearing masks, these people freaked out. And in every Christian nationalist conversation I've been with Christian nationalists, they bring it back to government overreach at the local level, specifically our children in schools. So the thing that used to motivate was prayer being taken out of schools.
Right.
The thing that motivates this new version was COVID masks in schools.
Right.
So when you talk to these folks, for them, it's all about, we're never letting that happen again. That's their theory. And so they've said we have to start taking over at the school boards and the county commissioner level. And we see that all over the country. And that's the work that we're trying to do now. We used to think that we could solve this problem by dealing only with the federal government. And we've now realized, yeah, we have to go where the cells have moved, the cancer cells have moved, and that's into the local government.
So if we stay on this more local level, and let's kind of finish up with this point if we can, it's kind of a two-part idea I'd like to get your reaction to, which is, first of all, on a local level, how would voters recognize Christian nationalism? And what really, other than the obvious idea that we should vote against certain candidates and vote in favor of other candidates, what should the local citizenry, the local voters do to recognize Christian nationalism in their community, and what can they do to counter it?
It's such a wise question, because as it turns out, the way you recognize Christian nationalism is the way we were taught to recognize the power of gravity, by its effect and influence. So you measure gravitational pull by its effect. So the way you see Christian nationalism in our schools is not to say to someone running for a school board office, are you a Christian nationalist? It still is not a self-defining term that many people want to use. Now, there are some national leaders who do. Josh Hawley is out saying, I am a Christian nationalist, and I call this to be a Christian nationalist country at a federal level. But a lot of people, they don't even know the term. They've never heard it. They don't understand it. But they traffic in the effects of it. Because it's not a grassroots movement, people don't have to self-identify. Because it's a leader movement, leaders tell them what the outcomes are that they want. So when you start to see curriculum limitation that wants to preference Christian content over secular content, when you see political movements taking over the selection of books in a library.
Right.
Now look, we have library science for a reason, because it's very important to know what libraries are communicating and allowing people to have access to. And when you see curriculum being limited, you know that there's some force that's limiting that.
Right.
Like noticing gravitational pull. You can see it happening. So then you start to ask, what's the cause? And when you find out that the cause is that particular individuals who are making these decisions are doing so because they believe that the outcome of school curriculum is to please God so that God will give blessing to the United States of America.
What other civic projects should we engage in to try to counter these effects, these gravitational effects of Christian nationalism?
We think the most important question we can ask people in situations where we think Christian nationalism is alive and well is, do you believe that our state government, local government, school board should give preference to Christianity over any other religion? Do you believe that the authority that our school board, our county commissioners, our state have derives its authority from Christian text or Christian teaching? To flat out ask the question. And when you can sharpen the question to, do you think we should give preference to Christianity, and do we derive our authority of power from Christianity? If people say no, then you can at least start from that framework.
Correct. Okay.
Here's what we know happens, though. People don't know how to answer the question.
Right.
Because they've never been confronted with the very power structure that they're operating within. They've never noticed it before. When they hear themselves say, well, yes, I think we should preference Christianity, they don't like the answer that they're giving. It's too stark, right? We like to say it's like the reason we don't put fluorescent lights in our bathrooms, because we don't want to see our face in the mirror in the fluorescent light, right? We don't want to see the stark nature of people saying, well, of course we should preference Christianity over every other religion.
Right.
Here's what we know doesn't work. To attach a label.
Right.
To attach a label
Right.
to a person's behavior doesn't work. To let a person self-define is very powerful.
Powerful. Well, the entire discussion, I hope people find it powerful. So let me just say thank you very much for your time. Hopefully people have a better understanding of Christian nationalism. You've devoted a number of years of your life to it. Let's hope for the best success for you going forward. Thanks very much for your time.
Well, thank you.